25 days ago, my wife Veena and I went to bed like any other day. We didn't know what was in store. And we got a call at 1 o'clock in the morning from India informing us that her father, my father-in-law, had passed away. So 3 flights, 1 car journey for 4 hours, and a total of 16 hours later, we just barely managed to reach home 15 minutes before the body was being taken away to the crematorium. And I stood there at that pyre watching the body with wooden logs along the length so that it doesn't buckle in the heat, being reduced to a lump of ashes. And I asked myself, what lesson do I take away from the life of a man who has invested 60 long years of his life as a practicing doctor from the same spot, treating patients at the highest ethical standards that you would expect as a doctor? Now, I didn't have the answer, but I realized that it was time to board another flight very soon. This was for a very different purpose. And this was not the end, but the beginning of the corporate life of my 24-year-old son, who had just finished his master's in engineering. This was far away in USA, and he was going to start his job. And then as a parent, I asked myself, now what lesson do I coach my son on corporate matters? After all, I've been there for 30 years. And so the intersection of these 2 questions around life, death, and beginning led me to the realization that the real intersection is about spirituality in corporate leadership. And that's why I'm going to talk to you about spirituality, why it matters in corporate leadership. Now, none of what I say is my original idea, nor am I claiming that I have mastered this topic. But I do want to share that spirituality is the most unrecognized, unacknowledged, and really unnoticed tool that is available in the armory of a corporate manager. Now, every one of us is a corporate leader. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what level you're at, and it doesn't matter what you do. You are a leader in the first place, and if you're in corporate life, it matters a lot. Then the question is, what is spirituality? And that's probably what's going on in your mind. Now, before I tell you what spirituality is as far as I see it, let me tell you what it is not. Now, I was in the United States about a month ago, and I happened to read a research paper which had a very interesting statistic. It said 62% of young Americans below the age of 30 identified themselves as SBNR. And I said, what is SBNR? And I kept reading, and then I realized that it stood for spiritual but not religious. And I liked it because it meant that there is growing recognition of that identity, that you could be spiritual, but you need not be religious. And you need not be alone if you wish to identify yourself as SBNR, as I do. And so spirituality has gone to the background because of the forces of technology, modernity, and science. And therefore, it's time to bring it back in the forefront. What spirituality is not is about religion. It is not about religion. It is not about the superiority of one religion over another. It is not asking you to give up, to renounce, to sacrifice, to go to the forest and lead an ascetic life, or to withdraw like the limbs of a tortoise and live under a shell. It is really a very positive, forward-looking concept. And I prefer to look at spirituality in my definition, which is pretty hard to define, along the pillars of MASH. Now, M stands for mind. Spirituality is all about the mind. Spirituality helps you to become aware of your mind. It is a chosen, deliberate response to life's forces of good, bad, tough, and easy times. And it is a choice that you make being present and at the moment as opposed to worrying about the future. In fact, this equanimity of the mind reminds me of what I do when I go to the airport. I often go to the duty-free area, and I try out perfumes. Why? Because it is free. I'm a banker. So I go one, I try two, I try three, and after that, I have to look for the coffee bean jar because I have to reset my nose. Now, spirituality is the coffee bean jar for your mind. It helps you to reset your nose because this mind is such a fickle, unyielding, difficult, volatile, turbulent machine. In fact, it reminds me that if you look at a map and you look at a coastline from the top, the coastline will look reasonably smooth between the water and the land. But you try to zoom in, you will see some volatility. You try to zoom in even more, you see huge volatility between land and water, a bit like a spoiled ECG of a patient. So spirituality reminds you to focus on the mind and look, at least it helps me, to look for those underlying causes about volatility despite what looks to be reasonably smooth or calm on the surface, especially in corporate life. And this applies to yourself and to your colleagues. Next, spirituality stands A is for action in MASH. Now, spirituality is about action because for years in corporate life, we have been taught and trained that if you cannot measure something, you cannot manage anything. Everything is about results. Everything is about outcomes. Spirituality reminds you on something else. It reminds you about actions and not just outcomes and not just results. Actions matter as much as outcomes and results. And actions focus does not mean that you become unconcerned or unattached to the outcomes. It's in fact the opposite. It is the combination of the two. In fact, a big part of my job in banking is to automate, it is to digitize, it is to make things more efficient. And a consequence of that is there are many job losses. And I often step back and I ask myself, is this really the purpose of what I'm trying to do? Because of the impact that it has. But then a spiritual mindset helps you to step back and acknowledge that you got to do what you got to do in terms of actions. The results will be the results. So it is that combination of results and action which spirituality wraps around itself. Then comes service. S is for service. And spirituality reminds you that you've got to be thinking about others, about your colleagues, and about the community prior to yourself. I know you're thinking, how come a banker is talking about service, but I'm trying. It is important because if you're able to do that, you will not have a United Airlines moment. You really need to acknowledge that there is collective effort in everything that goes, what seems to be your outcome or your effort. There is more to it than what you do. Think of a lamp. A lamp gets credit for dispelling darkness. But actually, the oil burns, the wick burns, the lamp burns, and then there is light. So acknowledge collective efforts and give credit effortlessly. That is about service. H is for humility. And this is not common. You might think you're a banker in Raffles Place, but you're one in a city of 6 million people. You're in one Earth of 6 billion, in one galaxy of 6 trillion. Right? So spirituality reminds you that you are really small. And if you stretch time, you'll notice that history repeats itself. Cities grow, cities die, empires flourish, empires perish, and you just have to acknowledge that when you look back, there is a whole repetition of a cycle that keeps happening. And in fact, in corporate life, there are so many pluses, so many wins, so many positive outcomes, but it comes with enemies such as pay, promotion, prestige, power, politics, all of this. Spirituality reminds you to replace these with equanimity and with empathy, because that's how you can behave as a corporate leader. Otherwise, you'll get caught up in what wraps you in a corporate challenge. And so it is this deliberate response to become unperturbed and remain calm even in a turbulent environment in corporate life. And so I think, I'll go back on this, the fact that spirituality happens in a context of corporate life, the environment in which you create is equally important. You cannot have only the definitions and not practice. Creating the environment is hugely important. Now, I was in Las Vegas recently, and I saw this hoarding on top of a huge building, inviting you to spiritual dining. I'm sure it's a good restaurant, but in the presence of half-naked women, casinos, and slot machines, this wasn't right. So creating the right environment to undertake a spiritual mindset is equally relevant and important. And so I look at spirituality as MASH, mind, action, service, and humility. In fact, when I think about the challenges that many of us have gone through, now we are bankers and we have heard about the global financial crisis. This is about 10 years ago. I had my share of challenges. Every banker had his share of challenges. I was part of of a team that was being investigated upon for something that had nothing to do with me. And it's quite intimidating to be interrogated, to be investigated, to be questioned. And of course, nothing came out of it eventually. But it's only a balanced, unperturbed, discriminative intelligence that you can get through spirituality that helps you to overcome these kinds of situations. Now, the challenge then is, you're probably wondering, that's fine, but what do I need to do next? I like the definition, but what is it that I could do? Now, there are many practices that you can adopt. I'm here to give you a small recipe of what I have tried to build, which is a spiritual calendar, for want of a better word. Now, if you can exercise your body and muscles for 60 minutes a day at the gym, you could do 15 minutes exercising your mind. And mind can be exercised through many mechanisms. Yoga is not just to bend the body. You can use yoga to bend your mind. There's yoga, there's meditation. There is also a small set of self-denial acts that you can take on. Small acts. Fasting. I'm a huge coffee drinker, 30, 40 years. And then on the 1st of May of this year, I decided that coffee will not hold sway over my mind. And I've given up as of 1st of May. So far, so good. We'll see. It's a small example. There's nothing profound in that case. I know people do many more bigger things. But the point is that you can undertake small acts to control your mind from small to big to really bigger things. You could also think about, in the case of humility and interconnectedness and broadness of your perspective, think about the many courses that are available online. There's so much to learn out there these days. I've signed up for a course with Oxford University online. It's mind-blowing. It's fantastic. You can learn a new language. I've started learning a very ancient Indian language, very hard, stresses the hell out of me, but I'm still at it. But it's very powerful, very useful. You can wake up at 5 a.m. It really helps. Very hard, but it helps. You can do something else when you're at MRT as opposed to perhaps what you do today. You can pray. There's nothing wrong with it. You can visit a place of worship. It's very powerful. And so the list is endless, and this is obviously just a few examples. If you think of service, there are so many problems to solve around each of us. Try to undertake any community project. A set of colleagues and myself 4 years ago, we decided that we will build 10 schools in Vietnam to benefit 4,000 kids who are underprivileged. So we started quite well. 3 years, we built 7 schools, and we ran out of money. And then I was worried and stressed because I didn't know how the money is going to come from. But spirituality helps you to refocus the purpose of what you're trying to do, the actions that you're really after, and giving that balance to, in this case, the volunteers who are doing great work. And they came up with really creative ideas, and we raised a whole lot of money, and the 10th school is underway now. So that's really good. And so there are many things that you could do on the question of spirituality being in practice. And so when I step back, in conclusion, what I think is relevant is, if you think about the fact that spirituality helps you to respond to corporate challenges in a much more powerful way, I'm reminded of a boss that I had who was an Ironman marathon runner, who was a fitness freak. He would make us to run, swim, walk, do many physical fitnesses, and I just couldn't fit in because I looked for a spiritual fitness regime. So what I have done is to incorporate this spiritual mindset into my regimen, which I gave some examples about. I've treated that as my measuring rod as part of my personal balance scorecard. And you do not want to risk the traditional corporate tools into the same tools, and I treat spirituality as an additional tool, and this phrase called de-risk and avoid concentration risk. You hear these in banking language. Spirituality for me helps to avoid concentration risk. And so back to the story of my father-in-law passing away and my son beginning his career, I really think if you are able to lead a spiritually rich and full life, you achieve the purpose of life. Right living itself is its purpose. And my call out to you is, can you convert spirituality from a noun to a verb? Can you spiritualize corporate leadership? And it's not that hard, because we have adapted ourselves to a 140-character life. I think we can adopt spirituality, and if you can treat it as a new technology and design it into your daily operating rhythm, then you have a TED idea worth pursuing. Thank you very much.